Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Pac Man, brought to us by Atari. Pac Man, originally created by Namco and was released in the arcades in the early 1980s, became one of the most popular arcade games of all time, spawning a phenomenon that included cereal, action figures, a cartoon series, and many other pieces of merchandise. With that, a home version of the game was inevitable. Atari, being the leader in the home video game console market, decided to get exclusive rights to make Pac Man for their home console, the Atari 2600. Todd Fry, a programmer at Atari, was given the job of converting Pac Man from the arcade to the Atari 2600. Of course, the arcade had a much bigger capacity and also had better hardware than the home console version. Fry was also given a very short development window to get the game out so that the Atari could of course start making some money on it. At the time of its release, 8KB game cartridges were first starting to be produced. Instead of using the new technology, because it was more expensive, they decided at Atari to only use 4KB in order to convert Pac Man to the home consoles. Due to this, the short development time, Pac Man ended up being a huge disappointment. So you take a game already being plagued by issues, a game that's very highly anticipated, and then you add on a very poor business decision. Atari decided to make 12 million copies of the game because they thought it would be so popular. The only issue with that being that there was only 10 million Atari 2600s currently in use in the world. Atari thought that since they owned the rights to Pac Man and being the only version available for home consoles, this would instantly mean that millions of others would go and buy an Atari 2600 in order to play Pac Man, and everyone who already owned the system was in no doubt going to buy the game as well. The game ended up selling really well though. The only problem was the game was immediately marred with bad reviews, as well as many gamers flat out returning the game and asking for their money back due to the overall poor quality. So here we go with Pac Man for the Atari 2600. You can immediately see when you load up the game that it doesn't quite have the same appeal as the arcade version of Pac Man. Pac Man only has two animations. He can only look left or right, and he can't look up or down while moving around the maze. There's only one maze for you to explore in the game, but Pac Man and the Ghost Speed do change up on different levels. The arcade version also had different numbers of fruit that you could get, as well as a few other things that made the game at least a little more interesting to look at, including cutscenes in between every few levels. These cutscenes, of course, are not included in this version of the game. A weird thing you'll notice right away with Pac Man is every time he eats a power pellet, which allows him to then eat Ghost for bonus points, Pac Man can only look right when he does so. There's a programming error in the game that even if Pac Man eats the ghost while facing left, the sprite will immediately turn right when trying to eat the ghost. Near the bottom of the screen, you may have noticed a large square I picked up, which actually represents the fruit in this game. This is the only type of fruit that does appear. While for what the game presents, it overall isn't too bad. If this was a standalone game for the Atari 2600, maybe it could be looked at as something that's actually a little bit enjoyable. Many Atari games, of course, are very simplistic games, but this is a port of the most popular arcade game of all time. Doing that, you really kinda gotta step up your game. And unfortunately, with the limited amount of time and memory, this game ends up falling very flat. One thing you've also probably noticed is the weird flickering that happens with the ghosts. While it's kind of an interesting effect considering they are ghosts to be kind of see-through, this flickering effect really got some negative reviews and a lot of people were complaining about it. Once you've completed a level though, you've pretty much seen what the game has to offer. There is, however, one thing about the game though that can really help you out and make the game even easier than it actually already is. There's actually a pattern. Similar to the actual arcade game of Pac Man as well, you can actually do a certain pattern and you're almost 99% guaranteed in order to beat the level without being eaten by one of the ghosts, as well as eat all the wafers at the same time. Another weird thing about the wafers though, I must say, is that you can see a few of them are too close together. They're not actually circles and there's no rounded objects other than really Pac Man and the top of the ghosts themselves. There's no round edges on the walls, there's no roundness to any of the fruit, And the pellets themselves, as you see, of course, are just straight lines, including some of them joined together in what looks like one giant line, but in fact is actually two pellets stuck together. You'll also notice some other weird graphical glitches about the game and things that can happen. It's a little bit hard to duplicate, but sometimes, as you notice, there's a hole in the bottom and top of the screen. Unfortunately, unlike the real Pac Man where you would go through the openings in the side of the maze and come out the other side, here you just stay up there and are actually stuck there until you hit the down button or up button in order to move out. The ghosts themselves can actually travel into these areas as well, and when they do so, if you're able to get all 4 ghosts to go into one of these, the ghosts get permanently stuck and actually can't escape, allowing you to easily complete the entire rest of the maze without having to worry about them. While it would be impossible for Pac Man to actually duplicate the arcade sound effects, I have to admit that they actually did an okay job in this department. While not great by any means, at least they tried, and this is one of the least offensive areas of the game. After I complete the 3rd maze here and move on to the 4th one, the last one I'm going to be doing, watch the path I take. This is the exact path you can take, and every time you do so, you'll be able to complete the maze without having to worry about losing a life. This can only be done on certain stages, though. It can't be done on the 1st, the 7th, or the 8th level. However, it can be done on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th mazes. Sometimes, though, you will end up getting eaten by one of the ghosts. It's just something that happens due to the varying speeds of the ghost and Pac Man himself. The good news is, though, you're most likely only going to lose 1 life when this happens in case the pattern messes up, and you get a free extra life every time you're able to complete 1 stage in the game. Memorizing this pattern, you can play this game for absolutely ever. Once you reach 99,999 points, though, once you reach 1 more point, the score goes actually all the way back down to 0. Before finishing up the game, I let the ghost actually eat me on the last screen because the death animation of Pac Man, I think, is actually the overall best graphical thing that this game is able to do. Over the course of video game history, there have been many terrible games. There's also been many other terrible arcade ports to home consoles that didn't turn out so well. However, there are very few games given the reputation of causing the video game market to crash. Pac Man, along with E.T. for the Atari 2600, are 2 games that are pretty much the sole reason why the video game market crashed in 1983. Atari would go on to destroy many of the extra unused cartridges for both games, and even though Atari would make better home ports of other Pac Man titles, including even the original Pac Man for its secondary console, the Atari 5200, the damage was more than done. With that, though, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.